All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to a late week episode of the Eric Jr. Podcast, a Thursday night recording. Boys, we're behind schedule. How are you?
I'm a bit stressed. Stressful time of year. Things are all coming together very quickly. So we decided to wait a couple of days to record this one. That and the Eagles play made it so we don't want to record. So here we go.
Yeah, the days are starting to blur together a little bit over here for me. And tell you what, it's not great. It's not great at all. Boy, I don't really want to talk about much of it, especially not the Eagles. But
it's been a positive couple of months since the Sixers got Morey, but that Eagles game, that really took just like the sauce out of me. I'm just like sauceless over here. I got nothing. I'm a hollow shell.
This guy's naked angel hair. Way to go, boys. Listener, you heard him. Just pause your phone, put it down, go outside, stop listening to this. You made it less than a minute and a half. They really endorsed the episode.
We wanted a short pod.
Next week it'll just be me screaming for 40 seconds, and then I'll hit stop recording.
Okay. Well, that's enough of that. Let's get the actual topics.
Okay. So the Eagles are kind of sitting here at a crossroads, boys. The title of this episode is pretty much just going to be the end is here. Where do we go? I mean, there is no way around it. A structural collapse of some kind has happened, and it's up to Jake and the Creamster of the EJP to solve the mystery, because there's no clear answer here, man. I guess I'll start it as like a three-pronged approach. So you kind of have the roster, which has its flaws. You have the coaching, which has its flaws, and you have the front office, which has its flaws. And we've seen a regression.
Flaws,
yeah, we've seen a regression in pretty much all three. I mean, in the most macro sense, I guess, what do we see after this season? Because, man, even if they make the playoffs, like, what are we talking about here? If they, what do we kind of see as the most likely avenue of a serious rebuilding effort?
Yeah, I think, you laid it out pretty plain as day, and I think all Eagles fans have kind of slowly but surely come to this realization that a franchise which a couple of years ago we thought of as elite just turns out completely the opposite. The front office and coaching staff, Doug Peterson, Howie Roseman specifically, I think have to answer a lot of questions. I think Doug Peterson has a little bit more leeway because of the roster, the aging roster, which has not been addressed to a good enough extent, and then regression of Carson Wentz. I think Doug Peterson is a little bit safer, but I think Howie Roseman probably has to go this offseason. I think if you look back to that 2017 run, you start to realize that some of those strokes of genius may have just been flukes. So I'm much easier moving off of that Howie Roseman era than I am the Doug Peterson era at this point.
Wow. I think that's a very strong take on Howie, and I don't think it's that hot. I think there's a lot of people clamoring for that after looking at this year's past draft class.
Cold take. Cold take, he said.
Just zero
Cold
playmakers.
Take, yes.
Zero playmakers, and you look at the roster of the team, and really a lot has been placed on Carson, and the reality is you are married to this guy. I mean, there is no, we're not getting out. He gets at least all of next year, but just because of the Hurts pick now, that's going to be a looming, and constant reminder or contradiction in your team's philosophy because of the question marks regarding Doug Peterson possibly losing his play calling, where I at least always viewed that as kind of a strength of his innovative nature. Obviously, being aggressive on fourth down is one thing, but it was also creative play calling. And that struck me as a strength of his throughout his, relatively short tenure here thus far as our Eagles head coach. He definitely gets, next year. I want to not overreact and say last year we barely squeaked by at 9-7. We had no receivers, not a great roster, but we were able to get there. Is it as simple as you're missing your line, which is something you had last year? You had your offensive line last year, and this year you lose Johnson, Brooks, and you have Peters playing on one leg. You're shuffling in all these lineups. Can it be that simple? I don't think so. They lost a couple games early in the season. They almost are Jake Elliott field goal away from maybe beating Pittsburgh early in the year. I mean, they gave up some easy ones in the beginning of the year. It's obviously a bigger picture thing than that. Howie being gone is definitely on the table. I'd be interested to hear your take on that, Ray. Does that need to happen? But Doug is safe. Carson gets one more year, and it's going to be a really crucial next year's draft, because if they whiff again, it's going to set this team back and really define our immediate, championship window.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple pieces to it. Like, just the quickest thing to address is like the Hurts thing of like the pressure and the clamoring for the QB change. That was so obviously inevitable after the pick. I mean, we discussed it on here. Like it just opens a Pandora's box, and we all kind of hated the pick at the time, mostly as like a, hey, aren't you trying to compete? This is like an asset that's 2 years away from being worthwhile, considering you gave the guy like a 4-year extension who's going to be in front of him. So that was like pretty clearly going to be coming down the pipe. So that one was like questioned at the time. But I will say, in terms of Howie being the first one ousted prior to Doug, like I think I agree with Cream. I agree with Cream, man. This guy
Whoa.
is missed. He's missing left and right. I mean,
big whiffs. Big whiffs.
And the philosophy of what they did outside of the Hurts pick this last offseason and linebacker, I would say, were pretty in line with what I thought they should be doing and what most people thought they should be doing. I mean, they drafted 5 wide receivers, one in the first round, and they traded for an elite cornerback. And, they tried to kind of surround Carson with weapons, but they took the wrong players, and they keep doing it. And they traded for Deshaun Jackson, which was horrible at the time and has been an albatross, like, financially. And they extend Carson despite injury concerns and regression, and it's like
they extend Alshon. Yeah.
They extend Alshon. Like the crux of the issues are coming from poor drafting and poor money management in terms of investing in like legacy players. And you see there's like a big I guess kind of like pothole coming down the road where A, you're going to have less cap space and they're really tied up right now. And B, you kind of have Carson, Alshon, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, Deshaun Jackson. You have this like 2015 core and really bad cap maneuverability. And that's supposed to be, everybody was always kind of accepting of the fact like Howie's like a B- personnel guy, but like an A cap guy, and their cap situation is now terrible, and they've missed on Justin Jefferson and DK Metcalf and CeeDee Lamb and just like so many viable playmakers. And I'm not even going to sell out Rager and say like he's done. He's had an injured first season, and I still believe in him. I still like his profile as an explosive athlete, but like the scouting failures at the offensive, side of the ball, and the lack of improvement on like the injury front. I mean, that is kind of out of Howie's control, but like you have these recurring issues where this cap guy is no longer managing a good balance sheet. The balance sheet looks terrible, and he's missing on receiver after receiver after receiver, and it's killing his quarterback. And so, like, at this point, I got to say, like, if you are picking one to kind of tear down and saying, like, who's going to be more integral to kind of righting the ship, I think you do have to keep Doug, with the caveat of stripping some responsibility from him, man. Like, probably not calling plays next year. But I think the right move is really evaluating the front office and seeing if a change needs to be had in your personnel selections, because these drafts just have not been fruitful. I think during the game they said, like, they've had one Pro Bowler that they drafted since like 2010 or something like that in the first round.
Howie Roseman came back.
Since Howie Roseman came back, it's just not producing enough win value from the draft, and like that's a little more tolerable if you are always kind of really flexible with your cap space, but they aren't even that anymore. So it's terrible.
Yeah, the drafting is just absolutely at the crux of this. The inability to draft. Receivers get their, he's whiffed on receivers, but he's whiffing on basically every other position as well. He hasn't been able to stabilize. He hasn't been able to draft stabilize the cornerback or the secondary at all. And then he keeps whiffing on pass rushers. And I agree with you about Rager. I was one of his biggest fans pre-draft. I had him very high, and even I had him lower than Jefferson, where it's those obvious kind of picks that really just make it easy for me to say goodbye to him. He was very good for us for one season basically, and it's really gone downhill ever since. And the downgrade in every statistical category just across the board tells the story. So yeah, I think it's got to be Howie.
And again, I think that is now, I don't know if the rest of the season salvages that. I don't know if a 5 or 6 win division win and then playoff salvageability saves that job. I think that decision may already be being required because of not only the whiffs, but the nature of the players being taken. And by that, I mean, not only do you take Hurts this year, then you take a project linebacker in the 3rd round, Davion Taylor, instead of getting an immediate contributor. And then you take these wide receivers at the end of a round and say, all right, one of those guys is going to pan out while paying the aging every minute Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson. It's a more holistic critique of the construction, and I think that's why you're justified and maybe firing that top guy. I think the interesting conversation then falls on, okay, to get rid of Howie, you bring in whoever. With Doug, I don't know if he's not calling plays. I don't really know. I feel like you take that away from him. I don't know. And then depending on how you feel about Jim Schwartz, who I think is going to maybe want to go after this year, or he stays around maybe one more year, but I don't think he's there. He's been here 5 years.
Maybe he wants to be the head coach. Maybe he gets elevated. I don't know.
I think Jim Schwartz is one. I've always been a critic of Jim Schwartz, so I think he's going to stay. I think he's going to try to angle for that head coaching job, and I think it would be a disaster if he got it.
Oh my God, that would be terrible.
He's a bad coach.
That would be terrible.
So the team has been one of the other main issues with the team, and we don't really want to get too into the specifics of the Seahawks game. I mean, it's probably been beaten into the ground.
It was terrible. There's nothing else to say.
Yeah, and that first drive, and the defense has played well, but that first drive is kind of indicative of some of the things where slippage outside of areas has started to occur there, where they had the 2 fighting penalties that saved the Seahawks on 3rd downs and put them on the 1 yard line. Those kind of things, the team is getting less disciplined. False starts, fighting, things that are indicative of cultural problems are starting to come up, and that was always kind of, and still what I think can be Doug's saving grace is that even if you strip him from play calling, this team has never gone limp. This team has never been, even with all the injuries in the past 4 years that he's been here, the team has never not played hard. The team has never not been like competitive for him or like bad mouthing him to the media or anything. So he's always been able to maintain a successful culture, but even now we're starting to see that slip. And I just think it might be him being spread too thin. And I think it can kind of be like the kiss of death where it's like, hey, we took away your play calling. That's kind of like the writing on the wall. But I think if you're going to keep him, man, it kind of has to be that way to have him focus more on running the team and the day-to-day operations rather than calling plays and being so heavily involved in what they're doing offensively.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
It's just that how many head coaches are not either calling the defensive plays or the offensive plays? Is that like a very rare occurrence? I honestly just don't know. I feel like most coaches do one or the other. And with Jim Schwartz staying there, I would be very reluctant. I just feel like what you're saying about the culture already slipping, I feel like that can contribute to, go ahead.
I would fire Jim Schwartz. I would try to move on from him. Get somebody, a
I
little
think I
more
might too.
modern. Because his I feel like he kind of wears out his welcome a little bit. He's a very tough personality. Prickly, I think most people would agree with. I think it's probably time to move on from Jim Schwartz.
I'm looking at it like I'm just looking at teams and like knowing how they're set up. It's kind of a mixed bag, Jake. It's kind of like
yeah, I feel like there are definitely teams that
like Belichick doesn't do it, but Andy Reid does. Gruden does. Mike Tomlin doesn't, but McVay does. I don't think Mike Vrabel does.
Interesting.
So it's kind of like Pete Carroll.
And that doesn't mean they're not. Yeah, it doesn't mean they're not involved. It's just they're not directly. They don't have to,
calling plays on a down-to-down basis. Yeah.
I think after you call the Philly special in the Super Bowl, doesn't that buy you, like, I don't know, like, what fucking coach is, I don't know. I know it's the past. You can't live in the past, but I don't know. I think I'm reluctant on that. Right?
They're 3-7. You know what it buys you? It buys you a offense that's scoring like 17 points a game. That's what it freaking buys you.
How many line combinations?
Get fired after this train wreck of a season. That's what it buys you.
Yeah, that's honestly the great answer because that's pretty much what it is. It buys you one train wreck season. And if he comes out and they're 7-9 next year, you're done. Like, you have to be above 500 the next season.
Yeah, we'll worry about that next year. But we agree that he's safe for now.
If they're rebuilding 9-7 or 7-9, at least be different than this. This can't be they came to this year as like a last hurrah kind of thing for the Super Bowl guys and, hoping to win a terrible division and try to make some noise in the playoffs. And this team is just lifeless. So it can't, whatever the iteration next year, it just can't be this. This can't happen again.
Yeah, they're the 8th worst team in football in offense of points per game. They're averaging 21.5 points per game. So,
and that's with some pretty historically bad teams. Yeah.
And a huge payroll. Like, that's with a massive
payroll.
Like, the teams below them are like the Bengals, the Patriots who aren't paying anybody, the Jags, the Bears. Like, it's the crap. It's the teams that aren't spending any money on offense. So the next thing does kind of bring us to Carson, where I looked at it. So since 2017, the Doug Peterson Carson Wentz pairing is 17-20 overall in their record since 2017, the past 3 seasons. Is it over? I mean, we got to look at it and pretty much say you have a guy here who is going to be if they cut him, which is a non-option, it's 50. I saw the graphic, I think, on Monday Night Football. It was like $50 million in dead cap next season and then another like 24 the year after that. So cutting is not an option. It's really only trading him and elevating Hurts. But I got to say it.
Yeah.
I got to say it. This 1 to 2 plays of Hurts crap, it's got to go, man. You either need to be all in or all out, in my opinion.
All in, or can you still be, can you be 30% in? Can you be a little bit more?
He needs to be either the starting quarterback with no talk of Hurts is maybe getting more snaps. Hurts is maybe evolving in the offense. There should be like what did we see on Monday night that was any different than what we've seen for 10 games before that? I mean, you're sitting here and he's still getting 3 plays a game where he's like running an RPO and it's like okay, and then he comes right back out. Like what are we really doing that's any different than the beginning of the season? I feel like if you're going to be having changes, quote unquote changes to the quarterback situation, like it's not it's and if you're doing full drives for Hurts, then you might as well be benching Wentz completely.
That's a good point. I don't know where the medium is because I don't think Jalen Hurts is ready. I think if you throw him out there, he'll be a disaster. More or less of a disaster than Carson Wentz is obviously up for debate, but I don't think it gets better with Jalen Hurts is my main concern, why I'm reluctant to do that.
I'm fine with that, and I think that I tend to agree with that. I think
you tank any of his value, you really like, I mean, you scar the. We've seen it before. Talented young quarterbacks who aren't ready, who need another year to develop, when they get thrown out into the wolves, it gets ugly really quickly, and I would just hate to see that happen to Hurts because he still potentially has value in the future. He just doesn't have any right now. That's my biggest reluctance.
I mean, I've been the guy that said you got to bring in Hurts, you got to get creative, but I got to side with Ray. I think I'm where, like, if they lose the next 2, then maybe you just, like, give Hurts a game, or maybe the last game of the year you'd give it to him against the Redskins.
Yeah,
I don't fucking know.
Once it gets to that point, it's fine.
But for right now,
we still got some season left.
For right now,
there's
you
still
just
a couple
continue.
Games.
You just got to, like, bite the bullet with Wentz and just be like, you got to fucking, I know everything's falling around you. I know the roster's fucked up. I know your line is gone. But you got to, like, there's got to be some emergence, some development of his blatant flaws. And
throw the football away, man. Throw the football away.
Throw the football away, and just, like, I don't know, like, what makes him special were, it seems, his instincts and his ability to get out of the pocket. His flaw, one of his fatal flaws, is that he tries to make the special play every play, and if that's going to be a fatal character flaw, then it is something that is going to prohibit him from being able to channel what made him a franchise quarterback. And that's what we're seeing borne out in front of us over these past couple of games, and over these next couple of games. If it continues, it could prove to be the fatal final blow.
So, go ahead, Kareem.
No. Go ahead.
I kind of stick with Kareem's mindset. Like, I'm not calling for Wentz to be benched, but I'm calling for, like, the end of this, like, weird intermixed rumbling. Like, I'm honestly fine if they stick with Wentz the rest of this season and next season. Like, Hurts waiting 2 years to play is totally fine by me, especially for a guy who's coming in with such little throwing talent, I guess you would say. Like, he's clearly not a developed mechanically yet. And so if you sit here and you say, we're rolling with Wentz, he's got this year and he's coming into next year as the starter. If he gets beaten out in camp or something, then so be it. But, if you basically set the plan as, like, Hurts is sitting for 2 seasons, that's totally normal. I mean, people do that. So it's not like he has to be, Wentz has to be benched right away, but, like, doing this, like, 1 to 2 gadgets a game and then acting like, it's kind of like, you know what this is? This is Shake Milton shooting guard, or Shake Milton point guard, Ben Simmons power forward. That's what this is. This is the exact same thing. It's a floundering team that doesn't know what the messaging is going to be to make people still believe that they can get their offense functioning, and they're putting out what's like a false narrative that Hurts is going to come out and add layers to the offense and do things that are going to make them a different team. And we just saw the most recent game. It was another 2 plays. He made like one completion and ran it, and that was it. And it was the exact same thing. It was like the one game of Shake Milton running point guard, and then in the playoffs when they got swept, it was him scoring 12 points a game and being right back to like what we had seen. So it's really kind of drawing parallels to the other disasters that we saw, only a couple months ago.
That's a good point, right? That is absolutely true. I mean, I get why they feel the need to do that, but because I mean they invited the controversy on themselves, right? They knew what they were getting into, and to quiet down the noise midweek, they fed a couple stories, some lines to a couple beat writers that Hurts was getting more involved in the offense, which isn't untrue, but isn't exactly true either. I agree with a lot of what Ray said. I think you have to stick with Wentz for the rest of the year. Now, mid-game, if he like melts down, where he's just like interceptions on consecutive drives, I am totally okay with putting in Hurts mid-game, but I think Carson would probably in that point still have to be the starter next week. I think you can bench him, but I don't think you can bench him. I know that's a difficult distinction to make, but you have to just keep throwing Wentz out there because you have to see if he can work through this.
Yeah, like this situation this past week, like if he had gone into halftime without a first down, like it's totally justifiable. They didn't get a first down until I think their last drive of the second half. So it's like if he just throws a pick there instead and they don't score a touchdown and he has 0 first downs in the entire first half, I mean, at that point, if you're Doug, you're pretty justified to bench him.
No, yeah. I think you just got to protect Hurts at this point because there's no use throwing him out there behind a broken offensive line with receivers who, I mean, they outlined it very clear for the audience on Monday night. The receivers get 0 separation. There is 0 separation happening. Alshon Jeffrey takes 3 days to get out of his break, and now we all know it because they laid it out plain for us. Like, doing that, throwing him out there in this situation, it's just it leads yourself into more of a disaster because now you have, a kid whose confidence is completely shattered.
Okay. Do we have any more Eagle stuff before we move on? We don't want to go too crazy on this, but
how many wins will they finish with?
I think I said
4.5. 4.5.
5
or under.
I think 4. I think they get one more.
So you go under Cream.
Cowboys.
I'll take the over.
I think they get 5.
All right. Let's pop into a nice little intermission here with non-Philly stuff. We got the spicy Russell Westbrook for John Wall and a first. Jake, I'm going to you. These are your type of guys here. You've been doing the John Wall for years, like that little flex dance.
Good one.
Loves Dougie. Does it before every game.
This is your trade, man.
Listen. With all the high flying and the entertaining stuff that the NBA does, all these big names, all their social media fuck. Here are 2 of the worst contracts, not just in the NBA, but really in sports. I mean, these dudes, 40+ mil for these dudes getting swapped out. And let me say this, I like it. You know what? When it was first rumored, I said, I like this. Everybody said, man, I don't care. No one cares. It's terrible. But I said it anyway, and I do like it. I think Russ kind of fits with Beal a little bit. They'll squeak into the 8th seed. And, and with Wall, like, whatever, man. Like, I think it's probably inconsequential, but, like, it's just something that kind of makes sense, and it's just like an ugly trade. So I think it's fine, and I'm fine saying that.
Yeah, it's been like a popular trade on the blogs for like pretty much a year and a half now. You got two bad contracts, swap them. Let's see what the other people do. It's not better, it's just different. Which I'm a fan of that kind of team thinking when it's not my team, when it's somebody else's team. I'm a fan of that. I love that kind of stuff. This one though, it just kind of rubs me the wrong way. I don't know. After like John Wall, just like that's a tough break. I mean, I Russell Westbrook's inefficiencies are to an extent like his own, but John Wall was pretty damn good for a couple of years, and obviously the injury stuff happened, and now he's 30, and I really just don't know what's left for him. I'm afraid that he's going to get out there and just be kind of a shell of himself. In which case, I guess Washington did all right moving off of him and getting Westbrook, who helps them compete a little bit more, I guess, this year. But I don't know. I think it's kind of it doesn't really help either team very much because neither team are that much closer to doing anything of meaning. They're not making to a conference finals anytime soon. So it's tough for me to get excited about this one.
I think it's makes absolutely perfect sense for the Wiz. This is a really reasonable trade for them. You're adding a guy like at a minimum, at its core, like the Wiz are a team that has like kind of one of the weirdest situations, and so at its core, you're adding a historically durable guy who averaged 27, 7, and 7 last year. Like at a minimum, you're getting that, and you're pairing it with Bradley Beal. And from a Wizards perspective, like this trade makes sense to me for them, the Hornets, the Kings, like all those like middling teams that are borderline trying to make the playoffs. They need to sell tickets. They need to keep tickets. That's a joke. They need to get eyeballs, I guess you would say. They need positive attention. They need to be above 500. They want to keep Bradley Beal probably appeased with a better roster. And you're taking a guy who has given you 0 games played since 2018, and you're swapping him out for at least a guy who's going to, make you just by default closer to 500. And then with the chances of maybe like Rui and Robin Lopez coming in and like Denny in the draft, like maybe you are actually pushing for a playoff spot. This team is not anywhere close to winning a championship, but if you look around at the Russell Westbrook contract, it'll be expiring in a couple years, and that'll also be what's happening with Bradley Beal, who will be expiring. So they kind of have their like semi-competitive window here where Beal is automatically going to make them too good to tank. So it makes sense to me as a team that's like never really been that close to a championship and is probably like fighting more for relevancy, to bring in a really relevant star and at least have like 2 good playoff-esque seasons ahead of them. And if you end up having like 2 expensive expirings and you want to start like tearing it down, or just having Russ in his later year, like as he's kind of aged out, and then you're trading Beal for the big haul when he has like a year left in a couple seasons. I mean, I can see them kind of working it like that, because they're so bland right now. Like before this trade, like what did they really have? They have like a bunch of B- young players and then 1 great player. So it makes sense to me to at least have like a little bit more relevancy with a guy who is going to come in and give you 25 points a game.
Yeah, it's interesting just to wax a little bit about the never really happened Bradley Beal and John Wall era. I mean, it's interesting. Like 3 years ago, if you told me that John Wall was the one that was coming off back-to-back missed seasons and Bradley Beal was healthy and putting up 30 points a game, I would have called you crazy. I would have completely had that the other way. I mean, earlier in his career, Bradley Beal was missing like pretty significant chunks of games, and John Wall was always pretty durable. It's interesting how they kind of flopped in their later years. But I mean, I think it's a bummer. I really had high hopes for that duo. I mean, I think a lot of us remember those teams fondly. I think it's a bummer way to end a really weird situation in Washington. And then Washington and Houston is just, I guess that's a good trade for them. I don't know. They get a first round pick that now they have a first round pick in the next 3 years, you know? They went from 0 to 1. That's a pretty good, it's a pretty good trade, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I gotta say, I do like it a lot more for the Wiz, but because Houston is just, at this point, like,
Morey really cut and run there. That was kind of a dick move on Morey, if I'm gonna be honest.
Hey man, if you're gonna like, there's got to be some serious. Fertitta has some serious vibes to him, man.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna be honest, I can't imagine the best guy to work with. So.
No, I agree. He is to blame for a lot of it, but yeah, they didn't have anything on the roster other than James Harden, and Russ wasn't going to stay there another year. He really was pushing for it, and this was a convenient solution. So I think they did all right. Let me ask you this, Jake. I'll ask you first. Where do you have the Wizards over the Hawks for the 8th seed? Is that on paper? Is that clear in your mind?
Yeah, because Russ in the regular season is gonna do enough, I think. And that Hawks team, I feel like the theme with them, and everybody said it, so it's not original, but they just did like one thing to many. Like they just made one transaction like too many, where it's like it's just going to be kind of clunky to rotate all of them in, and like they'll be good, but maybe at the end of the season it'll be right them, and I mean they'll be playing competitors, with the end of the playoff structure like that. So that'll be fun, and I definitely think the Wiz, I would book it now. I might even go on to DraftKings, who we are not sponsored by, make a wager on it.
Cut that. I'll edit out that name because we're not giving them any free advertising. I'll go in and edit it out. Don't worry.
Good job, Cream.
Thanks.
Assuming, if we look here and we kind of assume the Hornets, I don't think any of the three of us would really consider them a playoff contender. You're kind of looking at Orlando, Washington, and Atlanta, and then maybe Chicago if you like them. But I don't.
Or generous, if you're generous.
If you're generous.
I'm not
but
it's
generous, it's probably Orlando, Atlanta, and Washington.
And I had forgotten about the play-in, so that'll be an interesting for one of these teams at least. We'll get one more of them,
And if you're the Wizards and you're looking at those spots, you're kind of saying to yourself, "Hey, we have the two best players of those three teams."
That's true.
Because if you consider Russ better than Trae Young, which he's
maybe
kind of a wash, maybe. I don't know. Trae Young is clearly not going to be defending anybody. So,
you could say the same for this Wizards team. Like, let me just read out their starters right now. Okay, you got Bradley Beal and Russ, right? And then Bertans, definitely.
Good scoring forward.
Hachimura, definitely.
Exciting young prospect.
I don't know who the fifth starter is. Is it
Thomas Bryant?
Is Bryant? Like, that team's not going to defend anybody. Like, they may score 115, but they're going to give up just as many. I don't have any of those three as 500 teams. I think it's going to be a pretty considerable drop off from 7 to 8, and then where those three rank. Just, I mean, depending on your preference, I don't know. I think I trust Orlando a little bit more just because I think they have the best coach of of the three. So we'll see.
All right. Let's move on into actual just Sixers specific stuff. There's not too much news around the team. It's been a pretty meh week. The Sixers adjacent thing is kind of the Paul George stuff, talking about we saw simultaneous stories of Paul George talking about the lack of accountability on the Clippers, and then other people anonymously talking about the lack of accountability on the Clippers, kind of confirming each other.
Right. Yeah.
So
Paul George getting it out ahead. I like that. I like that move. I think that's a heady play, getting out in front of it. I'm the one calling everybody else unaccountable. That's a heady play by Paul George right there.
Yeah, and his stock. You want to talk about stock? Might be lower than Howie Roseman's right now. That guy.
I mean, it's low. I don't know if it's that low, but it's low.
It's wilting. It's wilting. He's being seen as both a bad locker room guy and wilting in the playoffs. So you have kind of the stories of like, Kawhi making the team playing late. They had their own trainers and their own minutes they picked, like when they were playing or not. Like, it's kind of the stuff that you think goes on that is a little bit under the rug, but on this team it seems to have all boiled up. Does this give you pause? I was never excited about the Doc thing. You guys were a little more...
You were one of the biggest, not proponents. The opposite. Yeah. You didn't like to hire the most, I would say, of the three of us.
Yeah. Does this give you guys any more pause on kind of the Doc prospects here?
I think that was a unique situation, the Clippers, because you had kind of an established core of guys with Doc Rivers and Bev and Lou Will and Montrezl Harrell, where they felt like they were already a team, and then you add these two guys, Kawhi and George, who, we all knew from the beginning, but the worst kept secret in the league was that they were getting preferential treatment. They were treated differently than the other players. I would say, that's okay, but clearly that core, those three guys specifically, if we're to believe reports, really had a problem with that, and then that Doc didn't handle it well. I'm more hopeful that this situation is a little bit clearer. The hierarchy is a little clearer. The core is, pretty much the same. You have Ben and Joe, and everybody knows that they revolve around that, right? I don't think like Tobias Harris is going to be, texting reporters, team meetings anonymously. That doesn't seem like something that I'm too worried about.
This does not really move the needle for me at all. But what it has done is reaffirmed like my distrust of Paul George as like as like
it has nothing to do with Doc. It's purely a Paul George issue.
Well, just hear me for a second. Like for a while there, I was like, "Yo, this dude, like, really like him. Like, would definitely trade a lot to get him. Like, just like a cool dude, smooth,
two-way." He was like, he's the darling of First Take, where it's like, I'll admit to you, LeBron is the best player, but like two-way. Paul George.
Exactly.
Paul George.
Exactly.
Two-way?
Like,
yeah.
His makeup, his frame, his style of play, like I was like, man, like yeah, like this guy, everything about him, he's just cool, smooth, like, and here he is, just a couple years later, doing the First Take drama, talking about lack of accountability. Bro, what happened? You do not command the same respect as a two-time champion in Kawhi Leonard if he was to get deferential treatment. I mean, a little bit maybe on Doc, but the construction of that roster, you had role players that were established NBA guys. There was a lack of respect for what the goal was, even in the bubble environment. And walking into that Game 7, I think nobody in the league thought Denver was winning that game. The LA teams were destined to play one another, and they didn't. And, God, he's been horrendous. I mean, he clanked the three off, the side of the backboard in that game. He has no room to be talking about this criticism. Accountability has to be maintained not just by the coach, but by the top dogs players, by the top dog talent. So that's what I have to say about that. And in regard to Doc, I think having guys that he can tell them, I've won a championship, I've been through a lot, you guys have been through a lot, we need to get there together, and we got to do it together.
Still hopeful.
Oh yeah, I'm
still
still way in. And all the other,
I'm less in than Jay. I'm still in. Yeah,
all the
this
supporting
doesn't change
guys
how I
too.
feel about it. Yeah.
I love what they did with the coaching roster, and
I do like that. Things have filled out nicely, like with Yoger and Sam Cassell. Like there is a good the tertiary hires after Doc have created more confidence in me, especially with Daryl signing off on him, because there's no way he didn't know that was going to be the coach when he was in negotiations with the Sixers. So
right.
Things that occurred after Doc's hiring have made me more confident, but thank God he wasn't Paul George.
No. What a different world that would have been.
Oh my God, dude! I would have been so excited by it and just hated every minute of it.
Well, I remember distinctively one time I was at, only Westchester people will know this, but that little tiny Wawa with Jake that's on, that's right near like the music building on Westchester campus, and on High Street, and it's like, the one that doesn't sell gas is so small, and I remember just standing right next to Jake in the cashier line and just being like, dude, Jimmy Butler, if we just had him for our big three, oh my God, things would be so perfect. Like, wouldn't it just be so perfect if Jimmy Butler was our third star? And how, oh my God, we had him and he left, and I was like, he's going to fade. He's terrible. He's cancerous. Like, older. Yeah, his game is going to age terribly. Like, I just, like, you never know until you know. Like, we got a guy that 3 years ago, or probably 5 years ago at this point, like 2015, I was fantasizing about us having, and I had the experience, didn't quite live up to it.
No, it never often does. No, the fantasy is always much better. Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm relatively confident with Doc Rivers moving forward. I think he's a fine coach. He's probably an upgrade over Brett Brown. I think most people would agree.
Okay. The next biggest piece of news we wanted to get to, Tyrese Maxey. I want to hear your guys' takes on this. I crafted a take in the pre-pod. He picked number 0, a bold suggestion by Mr. Maxey. Number 0. Jacob, tell us what you think.
I want to like it. There could be worse. We could be looking at, 61. Could be looking at double 0. I mean, there's a lot of options, and regular 0.
Not the worst number.
Regular 0, not a great track record, with this Philadelphia organization. But you know what, guy? You seem to really fit them. You work really hard, so you're not a 0. And I think it's fine. There's worse numbers.
I'm out on it. I was like pretty seriously gonna do it, gonna get a Maxey jersey, but I'm out. I'm not buying a jersey. I can't be walking around with a 0 like that. Like, that's a dumb number, man. Not to mention the poor taste of Josh Richardson left in our mouths after a highly anticipated season, just an complete disappointment.
That's true.
You know what ruined it for me really is I saw a
Jared Bayless.
No, I saw Jared Bayless, of course. You know what really ruined it for me? Like, after draft night, I saw an edit of him in a Sixers jersey as number 2, and I was like, oh, man, that's perfect. That's the perfect number. Get him in number 2. That's like, he was number 3 in college. Obviously, he can't wear that. Number 2 is perfect for what I want him to be. And the fact he went with 0, that just really, twisted the knife in my back. So I can't really, I can't really come back from that. So I'm gonna have to move on from Mr. Maxey in terms of attire.
So I'm going to paint a mental picture. There's certain numbers, and this works. This is more important in football, I would say, but it applies to basketball. Like, if you take a guy who's wearing like number 0, number 1, or like number 11, I would say, and you just picture in your mind a silky smooth, extremely fast Oregon Ducks alternative uniform and a wide receiver in that uniform, that's who should be wearing a 0, a 1, or like an 11. Those quirky lower numbers are for super fast, silky smooth athletes, and that is not your game, man. You are a number 2. You're a number 2. You are rough and tumble, gritty defense, jump shot not all the way there. You are a gritty player.
Like,
Man, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. You are not that. You're a gritty player, not a smooth player. He's wearing the number of somebody who would be more, I would say, like Dame. Like Damian Lillard is a perfect 0. He is the exact kind of guy you would think of.
Great comp. That's true. Oh boy, strong takes. Good takes.
So yeah, it didn't fit mental picture.
I think that's his first miss. You know, I still love him. I still love the pick, but I think this is a miss by him. I think, and I hope, you know, maybe it's a temporary situation. Maybe he changed it next year or something. But I was legitimately disappointed when I heard the news that he was going to be number 0. I was legitimately disappointed.
Preventing the purchase based off the number. I mean, they say I'm crazy.
That's bold. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about, we'll touch on this real quick. The NBA had, in my opinion, a pretty surprisingly high number of positives in their first round of preseason testing for COVID. 48 of 546 tests, which, when you think back to like the MLB and the NFL's initial testings, where it'd be like 1,200 people, 1,500 people at a time, and they'd have like 10. This is pretty surprising, I would say, in terms of like the first round of trying to get things settled in before we start the season.
I think it's
it's definitely gonna. Sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Nothing. I just think it's this quick turnaround. Here we are like 2 weeks away from games happening, and we thought the NFL was pretty nonchalant about it. It seems that the NBA, with all this travel and with the schedule's about to drop, it does not feel as certain as you would think. And I mean, we're entering the worst part, arguably, of this pandemic, and you're going to be bringing back games and the travel without a contained environment. I am mentally preparing for, maybe more than the general populace is, but they're going to try to forge ahead, and we're going to see if they're going to be successful.
Yeah, I think it makes it, it was already incredibly hard, a hard job for the NBA to be able to pull this off. The line that they're trying to walk, not having a bubble, but keeping the games and keeping 72 games. It was already going to be very hard. It is now incredibly, incredibly difficult because these guys, that's just another week that they're not able to practice with their teams. That's another week. Even if these guys, if you can get them isolated and you can get them, getting negative tests back in 5 to 7 days, you're already so far behind in terms of like where the teams want to be for the start of the season. Now you're going to start worrying about like muscle injuries in the first couple weeks. Like you got to start managing workloads. Like it's just another thing to balance for the NBA. It's just not something that they needed. I mean, I think it's got to be pretty disappointing that they return such a high number, and who knows how high the numbers if you include like staff and coaching and the numerous number of trainers that have to be around the team. It just made a hard job even harder, as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of coordination, but ultimately, man, if the MLB was able to pull it off, I have confidence in the NBA. They've made a lot of the right moves so far. They've had time to kind of prep. So all we can really do is sit back and watch what is hopefully a better product on the courts.
Yeah.
Won't be as painful, that's for sure.
Anything else you guys need to touch on before we get out of here?
I didn't see you guys post your Spotify Rap Top 5 playlist, or your Top 5 podcast, but I have a feeling that the EJ was on there. I have confidence it was, and EJP, good name for a podcast, better than The New Slant or A New Slant. EJP, better name, and it should be on your top 5. So I'm disappointed if that's not the case.
I use Apple, like the podcast app. So
I
don't
like
consume
the separation.
Yeah, I kind of do like that too. Yeah, and I also don't consume any pods. Now some of them are becoming exclusive. Like Rogan, I know has moved to Spotify, but I think I feel the same way. I like keeping it kind of music only on Spotify. So none of those statistics I have for you. I would be interested in seeing that, but
I want that data too.
I know it's probably worrisome. Like, really, sir? 4 a day? Do you need that? But yeah, I'm looking at my Spotify one right now. 11,000 minutes. Top genre rap music. Definitely, I would say Trevor Daniel was a surprisingly frequent person for me. I don't know if you guys have listened to him. He's kind of like a Post Malone-esque type of artist, I would say. But
sounds like a fine young man.
Yeah. Jake, you got your stats? What's the deal?
No. I like keeping it separate. And now with podcast only being on Spotify, that's a real conundrum for me, because then I'm going to have partial data on my podcast habits when I'm going to want the full holistic approach so I can break down how many minutes are in each, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a real catch-22. It's a real, Hallmark movie ending here. It's not satisfying.
Cream, sir, how'd your rap come together?
Decent, 1,200 minutes. Rap as well. A lot of
1,200 minutes or 12,000 minutes?
12,000. Sorry,
I was gonna say
1,200 minutes. I would say that the non-commuting has definitely eaten in this total. It's definitely been a lot higher in years past. A lot of Travis Scott, a lot of Young Thug, and a lot of Frank Ocean. Those are the 3 guys. So that's what I ride with.
All right. Thank you all for listening. This has been the EJP. Stats for this podcast we're not going to disclose publicly. So thank you all for listening. Bye.